The night was thick with fog, curling around the crumbling gravestones like a living shroud. The moon barely pierced through the mist, casting pale, wavering light across the ancient cemetery. Each step on the uneven soil made a hollow sound, echoing through the silence as though the earth itself was whispering secrets it had held for centuries. At the center of the field stood a tomb unlike any other, centuries old, weathered by time, and wrapped in legends that had long blurred the line between fact and folklore. Its stone facade, etched with symbols barely recognizable even to the most learned archaeologists, seemed to pulse under the pale light, as if it were aware of the living eyes upon it. The team had arrived quietly, a handful of historians, archaeologists, and local guides, each drawn by a mixture of professional curiosity and a thrill that bordered on fear. They approached the tomb with reverence, yet with an undercurrent of urgency, sensing that history was about to reveal something it had kept buried for 3 centuries. The air was thick, not just with mist, but with anticipation, a silent warning that what lay inside might challenge every assumption about life, death, and the fragile boundary between the two. As the lead archaeologist brushed away decades of accumulated dirt from the engraved stone, a hush fell over the group. Every eye was fixed on the intricate carvings, skulls, twisted vines, and symbols that hinted at a story of tragedy, power, and perhaps something far darker. Locals had long whispered about this tomb. They spoke of curses and restless spirits, of blood that could never truly dry, and of a presence that refused to be forgotten. Most dismissed these tales as superstition, yet standing here, confronted with the heavy silence and the tomb's imposing shadow, even the skeptics felt a shiver crawl up their spines. The ground around the tomb was strangely undisturbed, almost as if time itself had bowed to the sanctity of what rested beneath. No animal tracks, no signs of previous intrusion, just the tomb, stoic and impervious, daring anyone to uncover its secret. The team exchanged wary glances. Each person carried their own fears, their own questions, but none spoke them aloud. The moment demanded restraint. The first strike against centuries of darkness had to be deliberate, measured, and yet inevitable. A sudden gust of wind rattled the tomb's ancient door, a whispering sound that resembled the intake of a breath, or perhaps a warning. The lead archaeologist paused, fingers hovering over the stone handle. This was the threshold between the known and the unimaginable. The stories, the legends, the chilling warnings, they all led to this singular instant. With every fiber of their being, the team sensed that what lay beyond the tomb's threshold would not be mere history. It would be something far more immediate, visceral, and impossible to forget. As the first stone of the lid shifted, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement caught the corner of an observer's eye. A dark, damp sheen along the cracks of the coffin hinted at a secret the tomb had preserved with meticulous care. Silence descended again, heavier this time, as if the very air was holding its breath. Whatever waited inside had been waiting for centuries, and now, the moment of revelation was finally upon them. In that instant, the boundaries between past and present, life and death, and myth and reality blurred. The team was about to confront something that history had refused to reveal, something that would haunt their thoughts, their dreams, and perhaps even the world beyond this silent graveyard. And in the dim, misty moonlight, the first hint of the impossible became unmistakably clear. The tomb was ready to speak, and its voice would be unforgettable. Long before the modern world had forgotten the quiet village where the tomb rested, stories had begun to circulate, whispers of a burial site that defied reason and time. The tomb was said to belong to a noble family whose name had once carried weight far beyond the village, a dynasty steeped in wealth, influence, and a darkness that lingered long after their bloodline faded. Local historians spoke of forbidden alliances, secret rituals, and rivalries so deep that even death could not erase their consequences. Generations had grown up hearing tales of a family patriarch whose demise had been anything but natural, a death enshrouded in mystery, suspicion, and an unrelenting aura of fear. Villagers avoided the area after dusk, claiming that a heavy chill hung perpetually around the tomb, regardless of season. Farmers recounted strange occurrences in the fields nearby, tools left precisely where they had not been, footprints that appeared overnight, and fleeting shadows that vanished the moment anyone approached. Children were warned not to play near the stone gate, and elders spoke in hushed tones of a warning carved into the tomb itself, a cryptic message whose meaning had long been lost to time. Some said it was a curse, others, a warning meant to protect the living from what lay beyond. Either way, the tomb had become a symbol of both fascination and dread, its reputation swelling with every generation. Among the scholars who had attempted to piece together the tomb's history, theories ranged from the rational to the extraordinary. Some believed it was merely a grand display of wealth and power, a monument to a family whose ambitions had overreached, sealed away to preserve their secrets. Others argued that the tomb had been constructed to conceal a crime so terrible that it could not be spoken aloud, a violent act that had stained the family legacy in ways that reverberated through the centuries. Whichever account one leaned toward, a single fact remained undeniable: the tomb had survived untouched for 3 centuries, guarding a truth no one had dared fully uncover. The stories told of the patriarch himself, a man whose influence had been matched only by his cruelty, who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Some said he had been the victim of betrayal by those closest to him, while others whispered of a ritual that had gone awry, trapping his spirit in a liminal state between life and death. Each account painted a figure both commanding and terrifying, a presence that seemed to linger not just in memory, but in the very stones of the tomb. It was said that the family's servants and allies had disappeared shortly after his death, swallowed by events that no one could explain. Over time, these whispers hardened into legend, a tale that straddled the line between history and folklore, tantalizing enough to lure the curious yet forbidding enough to ward off the faint-hearted. What made the tomb truly remarkable was not just its age, but the aura of immediacy that clung to it. Unlike other historical sites, where decay and neglect softened the edges of the past, this tomb seemed preserved with deliberate care, as though it waited patiently for the right moment to reveal its secrets. Local manuscripts, scattered across private collections and ancient archives, hinted at inscriptions within the tomb that chronicled events never recorded elsewhere. Researchers had speculated endlessly about what these markings meant: were they a record of a lineage, a set of instructions, or a warning? Each theory carried its own weight, but none could fully account for the inexplicable sense of life that clung to the tomb, the way the stone seemed almost to breathe when approached. Even the most skeptical historians could not deny the emotional power of the stories. Letters from 18th-century travelers described the village with an almost reverential fear, noting the palpable sense of presence surrounding the tomb. They wrote of nights when the air itself felt heavy, when the distant cries of unseen animals or the rustling of leaves seemed to form coherent, intentional patterns, as though the land itself remembered something long buried and refused to let it go. Over time, these accounts blurred with the oral histories of villagers, creating a tapestry of legend that was as rich in texture as it was impossible to verify. As modern interest in the tomb grew, the team of archaeologists and local guides knew they were stepping into a story layered with centuries of secrets, fear, and unanswered questions. Every legend, every whisper, every fearful glance from a villager now carried weight. The past was not just a backdrop, it was an active, almost sentient force, shaping the expectations and fears of those who dared approach. And as the team prepared to breach the tomb, they felt the cumulative tension of hundreds of years pressing against them, a silent pressure that demanded caution, respect, and courage. And yet, beneath the surface of myth and history, a more disturbing thought lingered, a question no one dared speak aloud but all felt in the pit of their stomachs. Had the tomb remained untouched simply out of reverence, or had it been avoided because the living instinctively recognized the unnatural within? As they stood before the imposing stone door, the answer was about to begin revealing itself, slowly, inch by inch, in a way no one could have anticipated. And the legends, terrifying and alluring as they were, had only just begun to hint at the horrors that lay within. The first light of dawn barely pierced the horizon when the team arrived at the outskirts of the village. A thick mist still clung to the ground, curling around the gnarled trees and crumbling walls as if trying to hold back the day. The tomb lay ahead, a monolithic silhouette against the dim light, its stone surface etched with centuries of weathering and secrets. The air was heavy, not just with moisture but with a sense of anticipation that pressed down on everyone present. Each member of the team carried their own motivations, their own fears, and their own unspoken questions. They were not merely explorers, they were participants in a story that had been waiting centuries for its next chapter. Leading the group was Dr. Samuel Hargrove, a historian whose reputation for uncovering lost truths had earned him both acclaim and criticism. He walked with a quiet intensity, his eyes scanning every detail of the surrounding landscape, measuring shadows, and tracing lines in the dirt. For him, this was more than a professional mission, it was the culmination of years of obsession with the mysteries of forgotten dynasties and hidden legacies. Beside him moved Elena Torres, an archaeologist known for her meticulous attention to detail and her unshakable composure in the face of the unknown. Her calm exterior masked a mind constantly calculating risks, evaluating possibilities, and preparing for the unexpected. She carried not only tools but an unspoken sense of duty, to history, to truth, and to the fragile lives around her. The local guide, a man named Amir, brought a different energy to the team. He had grown up hearing the legends, feeling the weight of fear and reverence that the villagers attached to the tomb. His knowledge of the terrain was unparalleled, but it came with unease. He moved cautiously, his gaze flicking constantly to shadows, listening for sounds the untrained ear would miss. The villagers' warnings had left a mark on him, a reminder that some histories were not meant to be disturbed, and some doors, once opened, could not be closed. As they approached the tomb, the first subtle signs of its lingering power became evident. The air grew colder, a chill that seemed unnatural in the early morning light. Birds fell silent in the trees, and even the wind, which had whispered and played among the branches moments before, now held its breath. Every footstep sounded louder than it should, echoing in a silence so profound that it pressed on the team's nerves. For a moment, there was hesitation, a fleeting awareness that they were standing on the threshold not just of history, but of something far more enigmatic, far more dangerous. Dr. Hargrove signaled for the group to spread out and begin their preliminary survey. Elena knelt beside the entrance, brushing away centuries of dust and dirt from the carved symbols. Her fingers traced the etchings, feeling the grooves, the uneven surface, the artistry and care of hands long gone. These markings, she whispered, almost to herself, they're more than decoration. They're a message. Someone wanted this story preserved, but hidden from the world. Amir's eyes darted nervously to the corners of the tomb, his lips pressed tight. And some messages, he muttered, are warnings. The team moved as one, yet the undercurrent of tension was palpable. Each member reacted differently to the oppressive atmosphere, Dr. Hargrove with quiet determination, Elena with analytical focus, Amir with cautious vigilance. Despite their professionalism, subtle shifts in body language betrayed fear. Hands trembled ever so slightly over tools, breaths quickened, and glances lingered a fraction longer than necessary on shadows that might not exist. The tomb had a presence, not a physical one, but something heavier, something that insinuated itself into the mind. It demanded acknowledgement, demanded respect, and in its silent way, reminded the team that they were intruders. As they prepared to examine the entrance further, a soft, almost inaudible sound drew their attention. A scraping, like stone against stone, came from deep within. Every eye turned toward the tomb. Was it the settling of centuries-old masonry, or something more deliberate? The team fell silent, each person straining to listen, to sense the intentions of the unknown. Elena's fingers froze mid-motion, Dr. Hargrove's jaw tightened, and even Amir's usual composure faltered. The tomb was speaking, subtly, and they were its audience, whether ready or not. Moments later, a loose stone at the base of the entrance shifted under Dr. Hargrove's careful inspection. Dust rose in a pale cloud, catching the faint light. It was a small movement, but enough to send a ripple of tension through the group. The silence was punctuated only by the sound of their own breathing. Each of them understood that this was the threshold, the precise moment between curiosity and peril. Beyond it lay centuries of history, and perhaps something that defied every rational explanation they had ever known. And so, standing there, on the precipice of revelation, the team prepared themselves. Every nerve was alert, every instinct screaming caution, yet every mind was captivated by the promise, and the threat, of what lay within. The tomb, silent and imposing, waited. It had waited for 300 years, and now, the moment had finally arrived. The question lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable: who would be changed forever once the lid was opened, and what would they find inside? The moment the first tools touched the tomb's surface, an almost tangible tension gripped the team. The stone was colder than it had any right to be, sending shivers up spines and making gloves slip from fingers. Even the air seemed to thicken, carrying a weight that was neither wind nor humidity, but something unspoken, a reminder that this was no ordinary excavation. Each scrape and tap echoed like a heartbeat, slow and ominous, vibrating through the bones of those present. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground, shifting with a life of their own, as if the tomb were observing, waiting to respond to every deliberate movement. Elena worked methodically, cataloging each symbol and crack she uncovered, yet even her precise movements betrayed a hint of unease. A subtle vibration, barely perceptible at first, traveled through the stone beneath her fingertips. She paused, leaning closer to listen, and the team fell silent. The sound was faint, almost a murmur, but unmistakable. The tomb itself seemed to hum, an ancient pulse that defied explanation. Amir's gaze flicked toward the surrounding trees. "It's like, the place doesn't want us here," he whispered. Dr. Hargrove's expression hardened, but even he could not ignore the sensation of eyes, unseen, but watching, pressing in from all directions. Small anomalies began to appear, each more unsettling than the last. Dust on the stone floor shifted as if stirred by an invisible breath. A faint odor, metallic and almost sweet, drifted upward, clinging to the air and making nostrils flare. Shadows danced across the carvings, forming shapes that were fleeting but disturbingly familiar, as though the tomb itself was replaying scenes from a distant, hidden past. Every member of the team felt it, the sense that history had not merely been preserved here, but trapped, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. Amir pointed to a series of scratch marks along the interior edge of the doorway. They were subtle, almost invisible under layers of grime, yet their pattern was deliberate. "Someone, or something, was here before us," he said, his voice taut with unease. The words barely left his lips when a sudden thud reverberated from deeper inside the tomb, like a heartbeat striking against the stone walls. The sound made everyone jump, their professional composure fracturing under the weight of instinctual fear. Elena's hand trembled as she reached for her tools, yet she could not look away. The tomb had become alive in a way that science and reason could not explain. They pressed on, each movement deliberate and cautious. As the tomb's lid was carefully examined, they noticed faint streaks along the grooves, streaks that glimmered in the weak light like wet threads. The team exchanged uncertain glances, words failing them. Could this be condensation? A trick of the light? Or something far more sinister, something that had survived centuries in silence, untouched and unbroken? The deeper they probed, the more the tomb seemed to respond, its cold surfaces contracting and expanding as though breathing in rhythm with their collective fear. The unease intensified when a subtle vibration pulsed through the stone, coinciding with a faint metallic scent that grew stronger with each passing second. It was not mere decay, it was active, almost intentional. Dr. Hargrove knelt, pressing an ear to the tomb's surface, and stiffened. "There's something inside," he said slowly, his voice unusually low. "Something that shouldn't be moving." Elena's analytical mind raced for explanations: trapped gases, animal activity, seismic shifts. Yet none of these rational possibilities accounted for the precision, the deliberate pattern, the almost conscious presence that seemed to respond to their inspection. Suddenly, the tools in Elena's hands felt heavier, as though the weight of centuries pressed down upon them. The shadows deepened, pooling around corners and recesses, creating shapes that flickered just beyond comprehension. The team's breathing grew uneven, even Amir, normally composed, could not mask the tension in his eyes. Every instinct screamed retreat, yet the allure of the unknown, the promise of revelation, kept them frozen in place. The tomb demanded confrontation, and they were compelled to comply, their curiosity outweighing fear, for now. Then, without warning, a faint drip echoed from the darkness within. One solitary drop, then another, tracing the grooves of the stone, carrying with it a shimmer that caught the dim light. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The team froze, staring at the slow, deliberate rhythm. It defied explanation, yet it felt undeniable. Something inside the tomb was active, present, and aware. The silence that followed was heavier than before, oppressive and thick, pressing on their minds and bodies. Every rational thought clashed violently with the rising, undeniable sensation that the tomb itself was watching, and responding. For a brief moment, the team considered stepping back, leaving the tomb undisturbed as countless generations before them had done. But curiosity, obsession, and the weight of professional responsibility overpowered instinct. The lid, etched with centuries of warnings and secrets, awaited their touch. The first stone of the coffin beneath it, cold and impenetrable for 300 years, seemed to beckon, a siren call cloaked in the promise of revelation and the shadow of danger. And as Dr. Hargrove finally positioned his hands to begin lifting, every eye in the group fixated on a subtle sheen along the edge of the stone. A faint, glimmering moisture reflected the weak morning light, something that could not be explained by rain or dew. The team exchanged uneasy glances, the full weight of what might lie beyond pressing down on them. For 3 centuries, the tomb had waited. And now, inch by inch, it was beginning to answer. The lid of the coffin resisted at first, heavy and immovable as though it had been fused with centuries of silence and darkness. Every muscle in Dr. Hargrove's arms tensed as he applied steady pressure, Elena and Amir assisting cautiously. The air around them seemed to constrict, thickening with anticipation and the faint, metallic tang of something that had been hidden for generations. Each creak and groan of the ancient stone echoed like a whispered warning, bouncing across the graveyard and embedding itself into the minds of those present. The tension was almost unbearable, every second stretched into a fragile eternity. As the lid inched upward, a faint chill rose from the interior, curling around their faces and seeping into their bones. Dust and centuries of decay puffed into the air, sparkling in the muted dawn light like tiny ghosts. And then, beneath the veil of dust and shadow, the first glimpse appeared, a figure, remarkably intact, lying still but not lifeless. The body was perfectly preserved in a way that defied explanation, as though time had chosen to suspend itself within these stone walls. Its skin bore the pallor of age, yet it seemed supple, almost warm, as if waiting for recognition. The team fell silent, the world contracting to the coffin before them. Elena leaned closer, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of the scene. The face of the occupant revealed startling features, lips slightly parted, nostrils flaring as if taking a last, silent breath. Eyes, half closed, glimmered faintly in the dim light, an unsettling suggestion of awareness. Amir swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edge of the coffin. How is this possible?" he whispered. Dr. Hargrove's mind raced for explanations, embalming techniques, environmental preservation, supernatural interference, yet nothing fit. It was impossible. And yet, there it was, a body preserved beyond reason, beyond expectation, and beyond the comfort of understanding. The horror deepened as the team noticed the faintest traces of moisture along the body's extremities. A slow, almost imperceptible trickle that defied natural explanation. Dr. Hargrove's breath caught. This can't be," he muttered. Elena's analytical mind attempted to rationalize, but even she could not reconcile centuries of stasis with the shocking, undeniable presence of fluid, as though the body were, in some inexplicable way, still alive. The sensation was visceral, immediate, fear and disbelief collided, leaving the team frozen at the edge of reason. Around the tomb, the silence pressed in, broken only by the shallow breathing of the observers. Every instinct screamed danger, yet every mind was captivated, drawn inexorably to the figure that lay before them. The body's attire, tattered remnants of a once opulent robe, embroidered with threads now dulled by age, suggested status, wealth, and perhaps ritual significance. Symbols carved into the fabric mirrored the inscriptions outside the tomb, weaving a narrative that had waited centuries for someone to decode. The figure was not merely a corpse, it was a story, an enigma, a puzzle poised between life and death. As Elena examined the carvings on the tomb's interior walls, she noted strange patterns that hinted at deliberate preservation, perhaps even protection. It was clear that the tomb had been designed with extraordinary care, its construction guided by knowledge lost to time. Yet no matter the skill of its builders, no explanation existed for what the team now faced. The body had endured centuries untouched, yet it bore evidence of life, subtle, undeniable, and deeply disturbing. The metallic scent that had haunted the air intensified, mingling with a faint earthy aroma, creating a sensory tension that was both nauseating and magnetic. Amir's voice trembled as he gestured toward the subtle movement of the fingers. "Do you see that?" His eyes were wide with disbelief. The tips of the hands twitched, almost imperceptibly, as though responding to the attention of the living. Elena recoiled slightly, rational thought clashing with instinctual terror. Dr. Hargrove knelt, examining the moisture along the body's lips and wrists. Every shred of evidence pointed to something impossible, a continuity of life, a defiance of death itself. The silence was punctuated by the team's collective intake of breath, their minds struggling to reconcile reality with legend. Questions surged unbidden. Who was this person? Why had they been placed here, in such meticulous isolation? And most terrifying of all, how could the body still manifest signs of life after 3 centuries? The legends they had heard as children, the whispered warnings from villagers, now collided with tangible, undeniable proof. The tomb was no longer a monument to history, it was a living riddle, a presence that demanded answers, yet offered none. Every theory, natural preservation, ritual magic, supernatural interference, seemed simultaneously plausible and absurd. The team's attention shifted as they noticed a faint discoloration along the base of the tomb. Moisture pooled in the grooves, glinting like dark jewels in the muted light. It was slow, deliberate, and terrifying in its clarity. The air felt heavier, pressing down on their lungs, demanding acknowledgement. For the first time, Elena allowed herself a shiver, brushing her hair from her damp forehead. "This isn't just preservation," she said quietly. Something unnatural is happening." Dr. Hargrove nodded, his hands resting heavily on the edge of the coffin. "We are standing at the intersection of history and horror," he murmured. "And whatever lies here, will not wait for us to understand." Amir's gaze shifted nervously between the body and the tomb's walls, the weight of centuries pressing down upon him. The discovery had shattered all preconceptions. The tomb had waited patiently for 300 years, and now, the impossible had revealed itself. And as the morning light gradually filtered through the mist, casting long shadows across the graveyard, a silent question hung in the air, one that would haunt the team, the village, and perhaps anyone who would hear this story. What force had allowed this body to endure? And what, if anything, would emerge next from the darkness? The tomb had begun to speak, and its message was chilling, undeniable, and far from complete. News of the tomb's discovery spread through the village like wildfire, carried first by whispers, then by urgent conversations that seemed to vibrate through every street and alley. Word traveled faster than the team could have anticipated, fueled by a mixture of curiosity, fear, and the dark allure of legend. Families who had long avoided the site now spoke openly of the events, sharing fragments of old stories, half-remembered warnings, and hints of what might have been contained within the tomb. The air was thick with anticipation, each conversation carrying an unspoken dread, as though the very act of speaking could awaken the past. Villagers gathered at the edges of the graveyard, peering from behind fences and broken walls. Mothers clutched their children tightly, whispering cautions that seemed both protective and fearful of the unknown. Elderly men shook their heads, recalling incidents from decades before when tombs had been disturbed, and unnatural consequences had followed. There was an unmistakable sense that the tomb's presence, long ignored, had begun to assert itself once again. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed that strange lights had been seen flickering in the tomb at night, others insisted they had heard faint moans or footsteps echoing in the early morning fog. Local authorities were alerted, though they approached the situation with cautious skepticism. Officers arrived to maintain order, their presence a reminder that the story was no longer confined to folklore, it had entered the realm of reality, threatening to disrupt the quiet rhythm of village life. Yet even their rational minds could not dismiss the tangible tension that clung to the area, a pressure that seemed to press down on lungs, hearts, and thoughts alike. Those present described an almost palpable unease, as if the village itself had become a living entity, aware of the intrusion into its most guarded secret. Journalists arrived within days, cameras and microphones in tow, hungry for a story that promised intrigue, horror, and an irresistible mystery. They interviewed villagers, capturing a tapestry of fear, skepticism, and fascination. Footage showed the cemetery shrouded in mist, the tomb looming like a sentinel, and the faces of locals etched with a mixture of reverence and apprehension. The coverage amplified the legend, making it impossible for anyone nearby to ignore the implications. Suddenly, the tomb was not just a local curiosity, it was a phenomenon, a story with the power to captivate anyone who glimpsed its shadow. Amid the growing attention, debates erupted among experts. Archaeologists and historians publicly speculated about the nature of the preservation and the possible significance of the inscriptions, while skeptics dismissed claims of supernatural activity as imaginative exaggeration. But the villagers remained unconvinced. The oldest among them spoke with certainty about the tomb's dark influence, recounting tales passed down through generations, warnings about disturbing the dead, whispers of blood that would not settle, and signs of life in the inanimate. Even those who had once dismissed these stories now reconsidered, their doubt eroded by the strange, undeniable signs emanating from the tomb. The psychological impact on the community was profound. Fear mingled with fascination, creating an atmosphere of tension and unease. Children were forbidden to play near the site, yet older youths dared each other to approach, testing their courage against the lingering whispers of legend. Markets and homes became echo chambers for speculation, and families found themselves caught between belief and skepticism, each individual interpreting the events in their own way. The tomb had transcended mere history, it had become a living narrative, pulling the village into its orbit and reshaping their reality. For the team, the external attention added another layer of pressure. They were no longer conducting a private investigation, their actions, decisions, and discoveries were being scrutinized in real time. Each step had to be calculated, each explanation weighed carefully. The team felt the dual burden of responsibility to history and the ethical weight of what they had uncovered. Yet beneath the professional diligence lay a gnawing awareness that whatever was contained within the tomb had already begun to ripple outward, affecting lives, minds, and emotions far beyond the boundaries of stone and soil. Amir, ever sensitive to the village's energy, voiced a concern that had grown steadily since their first arrival. "The tomb," he said quietly, "it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to everyone who feared it, everyone who respected it, everyone who warned against it." And now, his words trailed off, leaving the team to grapple with the unspoken implication. The disturbance had awakened something that could not be confined, something that would not easily forgive intrusion. As evening fell, the cemetery seemed to transform. Shadows deepened, sounds became distorted, and an almost hypnotic stillness enveloped the area. Locals reported seeing figures at the edge of vision, hearing faint whispers carried on the wind, and sensing movement where there was none. The tension became a tangible presence, pressing down on those who ventured near, warning them that the tomb's secret was not yet fully revealed, and perhaps should never be revealed at all. By the end of the day, the community was divided between fear and obsession, each side feeding the other. The tomb had become more than stone and legend, it was now a catalyst for collective anxiety, speculation, and unease. And for the team standing at its threshold, the realization was inescapable: whatever lay within the tomb was not merely a discovery, it was a force that would ripple outward, changing lives, altering perceptions, and leaving an indelible mark on everyone who dared to witness it. The sun set, painting the sky with shades of crimson and gold, casting long shadows across the cemetery. The tomb, silent and foreboding, waited patiently. The village, caught between myth and reality, held its breath. And deep within the stone confines, the body, preserved beyond time, seemed almost to anticipate the next act, the unfolding of a story that would not end quietly, and whose consequences would echo far beyond the walls of the graveyard. The day after the tomb's shocking reveal, the team regrouped to begin a meticulous investigation that would delve into layers of history, legend, and inexplicable phenomena. The cemetery, still shrouded in morning mist, seemed almost reluctant to allow intrusion. Dr. Hargrove reviewed his notes while Elena catalogued every marking, every anomaly, and every detail that could serve as evidence. Amir moved silently, scanning the perimeter for disturbances that might have gone unnoticed during their initial entry. Each of them was acutely aware that their work was no longer simply about archaeology, it was about confronting the unknown, parsing truth from myth, and attempting to navigate forces that had lain dormant for 3 centuries. The first step was to analyze historical records, manuscripts, and journals connected to the family interred in the tomb. These documents, scattered across private collections, parish archives, and forgotten libraries, hinted at a lineage both influential and enigmatic. Names appeared and vanished, titles shifted, and sudden deaths punctuated otherwise ordinary histories. Letters spoke of secret alliances, clandestine meetings, and a patriarch whose authority and cruelty had instilled both fear and loyalty. As Dr. Hargrove deciphered the faded script, it became clear that the tomb had been constructed not merely as a resting place, but as a deliberate vault for secrecy, ritual, and preservation. Each record added depth, yet also introduced contradictions that made the family's history murky and perilous to interpret. Elena focused on the symbols within the tomb itself, comparing them with sketches found in ancient treatises on funerary practices. Some of the inscriptions suggested protective measures, others implied restraint, and a few hinted at practices that bordered on the forbidden, rituals intended to halt decomposition, to preserve life, or perhaps to suspend death entirely. As she documented these details, the team noticed a pattern, repeated motifs of eyes, flowing blood, and enclosed spirals. They suggested vigilance, containment, and cycles, ideas both symbolic and literal, each interpretation more chilling than the last. The precision of the carvings indicated not random superstition but calculated knowledge, a deliberate attempt to control forces that the modern world barely understood. Amir's expertise provided context to these ancient rituals. Raised on stories passed down through generations, he recognized elements that others would dismiss as myth. Certain phrases mirrored warnings told to him as a child, embedded within folk songs and local folklore. He recounted tales of tombs that whispered, of bodies that moved slightly in response to the living, of guardians unseen yet undeniably present. His words, measured and deliberate, lent credibility to phenomena the scientific mind struggled to accept. As the team listened, a shared unease grew. They were no longer observers, they were participants, subject to the same forces that had shaped legends long before their arrival. The investigation deepened when forensic specialists were consulted remotely. Even before examining the body directly, they emphasized that signs of unusual preservation demanded attention, anomalies in tissue composition, traces of unknown substances, and signs of what might be a sustained biological process long past any natural limit. The team confronted the unsettling possibility that this was not merely a historical curiosity, but an enigma straddling science and superstition. Every new piece of information compounded the mystery, reinforcing the sense that the tomb's occupant had been preserved through knowledge and methods lost to time, or through something even more extraordinary. Contradictions emerged as the team cross-referenced local accounts, historical records, and architectural analysis. Manuscripts suggested multiple interpretations of the patriarch's death, betrayal, ritual mishap, or self-imposed confinement within the tomb. Certain documents hinted at rivalries and violent disputes, but no records detailed the mechanics of preservation, leaving a gap between history and observed reality. Every clue raised new questions, and every answer led to further uncertainty. Dr. Hargrove noted in his journal that, the past is not linear here, it curves, bends, and resists comprehension. The team began to understand that unraveling the truth might require not only skill but courage to confront what defied logic. Late afternoons were spent tracing genealogical records, mapping connections between the tomb's occupants and contemporary accounts of unusual deaths, disappearances, and unexplained events in the surrounding region. Patterns emerged, coincidences that were too precise to ignore, alignments that suggested both motive and method. Elena identified cryptic references to substances and compounds used in preservation, hints of experimental practices that skirted natural law. Amir translated sections of local oral history, uncovering subtle warnings that hinted at the body's defiance of death. Each discovery was a thread, and as the team wove them together, a tapestry of chilling intentionality began to emerge. Yet even as progress was made, tension escalated. Small, inexplicable occurrences disrupted their work, tools shifted position overnight, papers showed faint smudges that could not be accounted for, and fleeting shadows appeared on walls when no one was present. The team's collective intuition, honed by experience, recognized these signs as subtle indicators that they were being observed, or perhaps influenced, by the tomb's lingering presence. Rational explanations fell short, instinct demanded caution. Each step forward was taken with trepidation, every decision weighed against a sense of something unseen pressing against reality. By midweek, the team had constructed a partial timeline, linking the patriarch's mysterious death with specific protective rituals, concealed family secrets, and unexplained phenomena in the region. They realized that the tomb had been designed not only to guard the body but to guard the knowledge within, knowledge that had survived centuries yet resisted understanding. The interplay of superstition, science, and deliberate concealment created a narrative so intricate that every revelation seemed to raise the stakes further. The team began to grasp that the tomb was not merely a passive monument, it was an active participant in history, shaping events long after the occupants had been interred. Even as the evidence mounted, the most pressing question remained unanswered: how had the body continued to manifest signs of life after 3 centuries? The team debated, hypothesized, and argued, but no conventional explanation sufficed. The tomb had preserved more than flesh, it had preserved mystery, a continuity that defied time and reason. As they prepared for the next stage of investigation, a quiet awareness settled over them: the tomb's secrets were not merely historical puzzles but challenges that demanded confrontation with forces beyond their comprehension. And as night fell, casting long shadows over the graveyard, the team felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon them. Each discovery brought insight, yet also unease, each answer deepened the mystery, and every carefully documented observation only hinted at a larger, more disturbing truth. The tomb had been waiting for 300 years for someone to notice, someone to witness, someone to attempt understanding. And now, the investigation was underway, a deliberate probing into forces that had been silent for centuries, forces that might not permit the living to leave unchanged. The day the forensic team arrived, the atmosphere around the tomb had shifted palpably. What had been cautious curiosity now teetered on the edge of awe and dread. Dr. Hargrove, Elena, and Amir prepared meticulously, aware that every procedure, every observation, could provide critical insight, or disturb the delicate balance of centuries-old preservation. The team of specialists moved methodically, bringing advanced equipment, imaging devices, and chemical analysis tools that promised the possibility of tangible answers. Yet even in the presence of cutting-edge science, a pervasive tension lingered. The tomb had endured centuries untouched, and now the modern world sought to unravel its secrets. Initial imaging revealed astonishing details. X-ray scans of the body inside the coffin showed skeletal structures perfectly intact, soft tissues remarkably preserved, and vascular traces that suggested continued biological activity far beyond what conventional science deemed possible. Elena studied the scans in silence, noting the subtle irregularities, faint movements in extremities, the presence of fluid in circulatory pathways, and cellular integrity that should have long since deteriorated. "This isn't preservation as we understand it," she said quietly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "This is something else, something we can't fully explain." Dar. Hargrove examined the tomb's interior for signs of structural anomalies that might have contributed to preservation. He discovered hidden channels and microenvironments deliberately constructed to control humidity, airflow, and temperature, a meticulous orchestration suggesting not just care, but profound knowledge of forces that intersected biology and chemistry. Each layer of the tomb, each hidden compartment, was a testament to ingenuity that defied assumptions about 18th-century practices. And yet, even with these revelations, the body's continued signs of life remained inexplicable. Chemical analysis produced results that were simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. Residues found on the body's skin and within the coffin indicated the presence of substances unknown to modern science, organic compounds that resisted decomposition, maintained cellular viability, and seemed to interact with the body in a dynamic, life-sustaining manner. The forensic chemist, a woman named Dr. Lila Hartman, noted with measured alarm that some compounds bore no identifiable molecular structure, defying categorization. This, she said, is not merely embalming. This is, beyond anything documented in human history. Her words hung in the air, leaving the team in stunned silence. Further tests revealed microscopic traces of what could only be described as a biological feedback mechanism. Tissue samples demonstrated reactions to light, touch, and subtle environmental changes. The body's extremities, though immobile to the naked eye, exhibited measurable responses when exposed to controlled stimuli. Heart rate monitors, applied experimentally, detected faint rhythmic pulses. The team struggled to reconcile centuries of stasis with the undeniable evidence of physiological activity. The implications were staggering. The patriarch, or whoever rested within the tomb, had endured not merely as a preserved artifact, but as a living anomaly suspended between life and death. Amir observed quietly, his knowledge of local legend now intersecting with scientific discovery. He recounted stories of guardians, spirits, and protective forces, phrases that had once seemed metaphorical now carrying unsettling literal weight. They said it wouldn't rest, he murmured. That it waits. That it watches. Perhaps it sustains itself. The team shared uneasy glances, the line between folklore and forensic reality collapsing. For 300 years, the tomb had been a silent sentinel, its occupant an enigma preserved by means no one could fully articulate and perhaps never should. During DNA analysis, the team discovered another anomaly, genetic material inconsistent with any known lineage. Mitochondrial sequences suggested a hybridized composition, something that could not be reconciled with contemporary understanding of human biology. Dr. Hartman hypothesized that centuries of chemical preservation and unknown compounds might have induced adaptive mutations, or perhaps the original interment involved processes lost to history, a manipulation of life at its most fundamental level. The very concept challenged accepted boundaries between biology and myth. Behavioral simulations, conducted using high-resolution sensors, indicated sporadic, autonomous movements within the body. Fingers twitched in response to subtle environmental changes, eyelids shifted minutely in synchronization with light patterns, and minute adjustments in posture suggested an awareness of the surrounding presence. Elena, documenting every anomaly, noted that these were not random spasms but coordinated, purposeful movements. The team collectively felt the hair on their arms rise, realizing they were witnessing the embodiment of centuries-old legend manifesting in tangible, measurable ways. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the graveyard, tension among the team escalated. The implications of the forensic findings extended beyond science, they spoke to questions of ethics, mortality, and the supernatural. Could they proceed further without risk? Was the tomb a repository of knowledge, or a trap designed to safeguard its secret? Every calculation, every hypothesis, was shadowed by the possibility that the forces within the tomb were aware, subtly, deliberately, and possibly hostilely, of the intrusion. Communication with external experts added another layer of complexity. International archaeologists, chemists, and historians reviewed the data remotely, debating interpretation, methodology, and significance. Yet even among the most rational minds, a sense of unease pervaded. None could account fully for the biological anomalies, and speculation veered toward the extraordinary, blending science with philosophy, caution with fascination. Every message received underscored one central truth: this tomb, its occupant, and its preservation defied simple explanation, and each revelation only deepened the mystery. Night fell entirely, leaving the graveyard in a near-total darkness, pierced only by the team's portable lights. They paused, collectively absorbing the magnitude of what had been uncovered. The tomb was no longer merely a historical curiosity or a legend come to life. It was a testament to forces that bridged the natural and the supernatural, the past and the present. The body within, alive in ways modern science could scarcely define, posed questions that demanded answers, yet resisted all attempts at complete understanding. In that moment, the team realized a chilling truth: the forensic revelations had not merely illuminated the tomb's secrets, they had activated a new layer of suspense, a heightened awareness that the story was far from complete. Whatever preserved the body, whatever sustained its anomalies, had endured through centuries of silence, waiting for observers, and now, the tomb had fully awakened to its audience. The question was no longer whether they understood the science, but whether they could survive the knowledge it imparted, and whether some mysteries were never meant to be fully solved. As the team continued their investigation, subtle anomalies began to manifest with increasing frequency, pushing the boundaries of rational explanation. At first, they were minor: tools slightly shifted overnight, faint scratches appeared on previously clean surfaces, and a chilling draft seemed to move against the natural flow of air. These incidents were easy to dismiss individually, but their cumulative effect created a growing sense of unease. Each member of the team, despite years of experience in both archaeology and field research, could not ignore the possibility that the tomb itself was exerting influence over its surroundings. The first truly disturbing occurrence happened during a late-night survey. Elena, using portable lights to illuminate the inscriptions inside the tomb, noticed shadows moving independently of the light source. At first, she assumed it was a trick of the eye, a reflection bouncing off uneven stone, but the movement was too deliberate, too fluid. When she called the others, they witnessed the shadows themselves seeming to respond, subtly shifting as if acknowledging their presence. Amir, normally skeptical even of village legends, whispered under his breath, "It's watching, it knows we're here." The team exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the boundary between observer and observed was being tested. Electrical disturbances became increasingly frequent. Lights flickered without cause, cameras captured anomalies that could not be attributed to lens artifacts, and digital sensors occasionally registered unidentifiable heat signatures in areas devoid of any physical presence. Dr. Hargrove began documenting these events meticulously, noting correlations between team activity and the manifestations. Patterns emerged: the phenomena often intensified when the team approached certain inscriptions or attempted to interact with the body. It was as though the tomb, or its occupant, was sensitive to observation, reacting to attention in ways that challenged conventional understanding. Amir's awareness of local folklore provided context that scientists could not replicate. He recounted tales of guardians and sentinels, of spirits bound to protect secrets, and of bodies that did not fully rest. "They say the dead can feel eyes upon them," he explained quietly. "Not seeing with sight, but sensing intent." At first, the team listened with polite skepticism, but the cumulative oddities, synchronized shadow movements, inexplicable drafts, and temperature fluctuations, created an unnerving validation. The line between legend and reality blurred, each new event reinforcing the eerie credibility of centuries-old warnings. One night, while monitoring the tomb with infrared cameras, the team recorded a phenomenon that defied logical explanation. A faint, glowing aura appeared to emanate from within the coffin, pulsing in rhythm with the subtle heartbeat detected by earlier forensic instruments. The aura expanded and contracted, interacting with objects in the environment. A thin layer of dust shifted in its presence, and the metallic sheen observed earlier glimmered more intensely. Elena, reviewing the footage, could not rationalize the occurrence through any known physical process. The team began to understand that the tomb's influence was not only biological but perhaps energetic, exerting a presence that could be detected on multiple sensory levels. Auditory anomalies accompanied the visual phenomena. Faint whispers, indistinct but coherent enough to provoke tension, echoed within the tomb and surrounding graveyard. Words were fragmented, almost too soft to perceive, yet discernible enough to elicit a visceral reaction. At times, the voices seemed to call individual names, responding specifically to those present. Amir, visibly shaken, murmured, "It remembers names, it remembers people." The team's rational mind struggled to reconcile these experiences with scientific principles, but the undeniable sensory evidence accumulated relentlessly. The tomb was asserting its presence, blending the historical, the biological, and the supernatural into a single, incomprehensible reality. Physical interactions followed. Small objects moved without cause, a notebook slid across a table, a pen rolled from an elevated shelf, a flashlight shifted orientation on its own. The team attempted to record these movements, setting up multiple cameras and sensors, only to find that some incidents occurred off-frame or were obscured by sudden shadows. Every attempt to control the environment failed. The tomb seemed to operate under rules not fully observable, a hidden logic that governed actions in ways that defied conventional laws of physics. Perhaps most disconcerting were the physiological effects on the team. Members reported sudden dizziness, headaches, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Sleep became difficult, dreams were vivid and often reflected scenes from the tomb's history, with the occupant's presence looming, sometimes whispering, sometimes simply observing. The psychological strain compounded the physical and environmental anomalies, creating a pervasive atmosphere of tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. Every entry into the tomb became a negotiation between curiosity and caution, each step deliberate, each glance vigilant. Attempts to rationalize the events met consistent failure. Modern instrumentation provided evidence, yet no formula, chemical, or electromagnetic explanation could fully account for the manifestations. Even Amir, with centuries of oral history as his guide, expressed a growing sense of unease. The tomb was more than a repository of historical artifacts, it was a locus of active phenomena, bridging the natural and supernatural in a way that tested every boundary of comprehension. Each new event built upon the last, escalating tension and reinforcing the inescapable conclusion: this was no ordinary investigation. As the team prepared to retreat for the night, the tomb seemed to communicate a subtle yet undeniable message. A chill swept through the interior, the faint metallic scent thickened, and shadows shifted to obscure the body entirely. It was a reminder, deliberate and chilling, that the phenomena were not passive but intentional. The tomb's occupant, preserved beyond centuries, was not merely observed but interactive, shaping perception and experience in ways both profound and disturbing. The team, united in curiosity yet divided by fear, understood that the story they were uncovering would not conclude simply, and that each revelation carried escalating risk. The night ended with a heavy, almost suffocating silence, leaving the team to grapple with questions that would have no immediate answers. What force animated these occurrences? How had it endured centuries without interruption? And most unnervingly, what consequences might follow for those who continued to probe its depths? The tomb's mysteries had evolved beyond historical curiosity or forensic anomaly. They were now existential, challenging the very limits of understanding and daring the living to confront a past that refused to remain buried. The morning air was dense with anticipation as the team returned to the tomb. The previous nights had left them on edge, their sleep fragmented by dreams that mirrored the cryptic whispers and shadows they had encountered. Dr. Hargrove, Elena, and Amir approached the site with a calculated caution, aware that each step could trigger reactions from forces far beyond comprehension. The tomb had proven responsive, not inert, and the unspoken understanding among them was that this investigation was no longer just academic. It was a delicate negotiation with a past that refused to remain silent. As they prepared to open the coffin once more, every creak of their tools reverberated with heightened tension. The air itself seemed to vibrate in anticipation. The team's hearts pounded in unison, each beat synchronizing with the subtle rhythms they had detected in the body's physiological responses. Elena's hands shook slightly as she adjusted the lighting to illuminate the carvings inside the tomb. The faint metallic odor, now familiar yet increasingly oppressive, clung to their nostrils, a persistent reminder of what awaited them. Dr. Hargrove applied pressure to the lid, inch by inch, each movement deliberate. As the coffin opened further, a strange, viscous substance became visible along its edges, darker than blood, glistening as if freshly formed, yet ancient. The body inside remained shockingly intact, its eyes now fully open, reflecting the team's flashlights in a way that was almost sentient. The sight elicited simultaneous awe and terror. The preserved figure was not merely responsive, it seemed aware, its gaze tracking their movements with unnerving precision. Amir whispered under his breath, "It knows we're here, it knows everything." The unthinkable revelation came when Elena, focusing on the subtle movements of the body, noticed a heartbeat, faint but unmistakable, emanating from the chest. For a moment, rationality clashed violently with instinctual horror. The heartbeat was not the result of instrumentation error, multiple devices confirmed its presence, consistent and deliberate. Dr. Hartman, reviewing chemical samples taken previously, observed that the bodily fluids indicated not simple preservation but active biological processes. The tomb had somehow sustained life, a feat that defied every principle of biology, chemistry, and physics known to modern science. As the team absorbed the implications, a sudden tremor vibrated through the coffin. The body shifted slightly, limbs flexing in response to a stimulus invisible to all observers. The carvings along the tomb's walls, previously static, now appeared to undulate subtly, as if alive. Shadows flickered in unnatural synchronization with the movements of the body, and the air thickened, pressing against the team's lungs. Amir reached instinctively toward the figure, yet stopped, the weight of centuries-old warnings embedding fear deeper than any logical argument. The discovery was no longer academic, it was a confrontation with a force that had waited patiently, intentionally, for 300 years. Elena documented the sequence meticulously, noting every detail, the shimmer along the veins, the subtle flexing of fingers, the rhythmic expansion and contraction of the chest cavity. The team realized with growing dread that the body was not merely a preserved corpse, it was an entity sustained by forces both known and unknown, alive in ways that humanity was never meant to witness. Questions that had haunted the investigation for weeks now demanded immediate attention. Who had created this preservation? For what purpose? And most terrifyingly, what did it mean for the living who dared to observe it? As Dr. Hargrove moved closer to examine the face, the room's temperature dropped sharply, condensation forming invisible clouds around their faces. The eyes of the occupant, dark yet reflective, seemed to convey comprehension, as if the figure were aware not only of their presence but of their intentions. A whisper, barely audible yet distinct, traversed the tomb, words in a language lost to time, unintelligible yet unmistakably directed. Elena shivered. The tomb had become interactive, a conduit for something beyond mere physical preservation. Its occupant, long thought dormant, had awakened to an awareness that blurred the line between the animate and the inanimate. Amir, recalling his village's oral history, recognized the symbols and phrases now appearing in the whisper. They were protective invocations, warnings, and instructions encoded in a language deliberately hidden from outsiders. "It's not just a body," he said, his voice trembling. "It's a guardian, a sentinel, or something like it. And it has been waiting, for us." The team paused, realizing the depth of their intrusion. They were not simply uncovering history, they were interacting with a consciousness that had endured centuries, hidden beneath layers of stone, ritual, and legend. The unthinkable escalated when the body's hands moved with coordination, almost human in their intention. The fingers lifted, flexed, and then rested, leaving the team unable to discern whether the motion was reflexive, supernatural, or a combination of forces beyond their comprehension. Dr. Hartman noted irregularities in the biological markers that suggested adaptation. The body responded to external stimuli with calculated precision. The realization sank in, this was not a simple anomaly, not a miracle, but a controlled phenomenon, maintained deliberately, perhaps ritualistically, over centuries. Shadows deepened, elongating unnaturally across the tomb walls. The whispering grew, interwoven with a metallic scent stronger than before, saturating the confined space. The team's collective unease escalated to tangible fear. rational thought faltered as instinct demanded retreat. Yet no one moved immediately. Curiosity, responsibility, and obsession bound them in place. They were witnesses to an event that challenged the very understanding of life and death, and the gravity of this knowledge pressed upon them like a living weight. Elena's trembling hand reached toward her recording device, documenting every minute detail. The body's eyes, reflecting both the flashlight and something intangible, appeared to communicate recognition. The subtle rise and fall of the chest was no longer merely a biological curiosity, it was a statement of existence, a deliberate assertion of life beyond natural boundaries. The tomb, silent for 3 centuries, had responded to human intrusion in a manner both precise and profoundly disquieting. Finally, a realization gripped them with icy clarity: the discovery was not merely scientific, historical, or archaeological. It was existential. The tomb had preserved not only flesh but consciousness, defying mortality itself. Every artifact, every inscription, every protective measure was designed not only to safeguard a body but to sustain an enduring presence. And now, for the first time in 300 years, that presence was fully cognizant, aware, and engaging with the world of the living. As the morning sun pierced the mist outside, casting shafts of light across the tomb, the team understood that nothing would ever be the same. They had glimpsed a force that bridged time, biology, and the supernatural, a force that demanded acknowledgement, respect, and perhaps fear. The unthinkable discovery had redefined history, mortality, and the limits of human understanding. And as they prepared to carefully close the coffin, ensuring the balance of observation and preservation, a silent truth lingered in the air: the tomb had awakened, and its story was far from over. The investigation, which had begun as a meticulous scientific and historical pursuit, reached a point where comprehension and awe collided. The team stood quietly, absorbing the implications of what they had witnessed: a body preserved beyond centuries, exhibiting undeniable signs of life, and a tomb that seemed almost sentient, aware of their presence. The weight of the past pressed heavily upon them, intertwining with the responsibility of bearing witness to phenomena that defied conventional reality. Every shadow, every whisper, every subtle movement reminded them that the line between history and the living had blurred irrevocably. As the team prepared to close the tomb for the night, a heavy silence settled over the cemetery. The morning fog had lifted, replaced by a faint, oppressive heat that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. Dr. Hargrove carefully replaced the coffin lid, each movement deliberate, aware that the preserved occupant was not merely an artifact but an active presence. Elena recorded final observations, noting the subtle shifts in air pressure and temperature, the faint pulse still detectable in extremities, and the almost imperceptible glint in the figure's eyes. Every detail was documented, yet every observation left more questions than answers. Amir lingered at the edge of the tomb, reflecting on the stories passed down through generations, tales that had once seemed fantastical but now carried unsettling credibility. "The village warned us," he murmured, his voice tinged with reverence and fear. "They said some things are not meant to be understood, only respected. And now, we've seen why." His words resonated deeply, capturing the tension between human curiosity and the unknowable forces they had encountered. The tomb had not merely preserved a body, it had preserved a legacy of vigilance, mystery, and power that stretched across centuries. Night descended fully, the cemetery enveloped in darkness, the only light from the distant village flickering faintly in the distance. The team stepped back, understanding that their work had changed them irrevocably. The forensic revelations, the historical records, the unexplained phenomena, all converged into a narrative that was as much about human ambition and fear as it was about preservation and mystery. They realized that some questions might never be answered, some secrets never fully revealed, and yet the act of witnessing had imprinted upon them an indelible awareness of the extraordinary. The haunting nature of the discovery extended beyond the tomb itself. Villagers, who had once observed cautiously from a distance, now gathered with subdued reverence, their whispers carrying the weight of centuries of caution. They shared fragmented memories, warnings, and interpretations, each account weaving a richer tapestry of fear and respect. The team, though scientifically trained, could not ignore the cumulative psychological impact, the sense that the tomb, its occupant, and the surrounding landscape were interconnected in ways that transcended human understanding.